Hi, girls. So, Anna and Hope, of course, Robert Munch collection. Munch more. This book belongs to, well, I'll put you girls, Anna and Hope. Alligator Baby. One night, Kristen's mother woke up and yelled, "Baby, a baby, I'm having a baby." Kristen's father jumped up, zoomed around the room, got dressed, grabbed Kristen's mother by the hand. They ran downstairs to the car and drove off really fast. Vroom, vroom. Unfortunately, they got lost. They didn't go to the hospital. They went to the zoo, but it was okay. Kristen's mother had a lovely baby. They drove home and knocked on the front door. Blam, 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 blam. Kristen opened the door, and there was her mother holding something all wrapped up. Where was I? "Kristen," she said, "would you like to see your new baby brother?" "Oh, yes," said Kristen. So Kristen lifted up the bottom of the blanket. She saw a long green tail and said, That's not a people tail." Kristen lifted up the middle of the blanket, saw a great green claw, and said, "That's not a people claw." Kristen lifted up the top of a blanket, saw a long green face with lots of teeth, and said, "That's not a people face. That's not my baby brother." Now Kristen said to her mother, "Don't be jealous." Just then the baby reached up and bit Kristen's mother on the nose. She yelled, "Ah!" Then the baby reached up and bit her father on the nose, and he yelled, "Ah!" "That's not a people baby," said Kristen. "That's an alligator baby." "Goodness," said her mother, "we've got the wrong baby." So Kristen put the alligator baby back into the fish tank, and her mother and father drove back to the zoo. They came back in an hour and knocked on the door. Blam, 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 blam. Kristen opened the door and her mother said, "Would you like to see your new baby brother?" "Oh, yes," said Kristen. Kristen lifted up the bottom of the blanket, saw a fishy tail, and said, "That's not a people tail." Kristen lifted up the middle of the blanket, saw a flipper, and said, "That's not a people flipper." Kristen lifted up the top of the blanket, saw a face with whiskers, and said, "That's not a people face. That's not my baby brother." "Now, Kristen," said her mother, "don't be jealous." Just then the baby reached up with its flipper and flapped her father's face. Whap, 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 whap. And he yelled, "Ah! It's a seal baby. We've got the wrong baby." So Kristen put the seal baby in the bathtub, and her mother and father drove back to the zoo. They came back in an hour and knocked on the door. Blam, 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 blam. They said, "Kristen, would you like to see your new baby brother?" "Oh, yes," said Kristen. She lifted up the bottom of the blanket, saw a very long hairy leg, and said, "That's not a people leg." She lifted up the middle of the blanket, saw a very hairy arm, and said, "That's not a people arm." She lifted up the top of the blanket, saw a very hairy face, and said, "That's not a people face. That's not my baby brother." "Now, Kristen," said her mother, "don't be jealous." The baby reached up with its feet and grabbed her mother's ear and her father's ear, and they both yelled, "Ah!" It's a gorilla baby. We got the wrong baby. Let me do it, said Kristen. So her mother and father put a gorilla baby on the chandelier in a living room, and Kristen went off to the zoo on her bicycle. First, Kristen looked in the snake cage. No people babies. Then Kristen looked in a wombat cage. No people babies. Then Kristen looked in an elephant cage. No people babies. Then she stopped and listened from far away. She heard, wah, 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 wah. That's more like it, said Kristen. She followed the sound. It was coming from a gorilla cage. When Kristen looked at the mommy gorilla and said, give me my baby brother, the gorilla jumped away and wouldn't give the baby back at all. Then the baby reached up and bit the gorilla on the nose, and the gorilla yelled, ah, and handed the baby back to Kristen. Kristen jumped on her bicycle and pedaled home. Kristen knocked on the door. Blam, 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 blam. When her parents opened it, she said, would you like to see your new baby? Kristen's mother lifted up the bottom of the blanket and said, look, people legs. She lifted the middle of the blanket and said, look, people hands. She lifted up the top of the bottom of the blanket and said, look, people face. Kristen's mother picked up the baby and gave it a big hug. Her father took the baby, gave it a big hug, and her mother said, Kristen, you got the baby back. Good for you. But what are we going to do with all these other babies? Yelled Kristen's father. There's a seal baby in the bathtub, an alligator baby in the fish tank, and a gorilla baby hanging from the chandelier. We should take him back to the zoo. But Kristen looked out the window and said, I don't think we'll have to do anything at all. And everything was okay until Kristen's mother had twins. Alligator baby. In 1979, some friends of mine were having a birthday party for their daughter Kristen. I had been Kristen's teacher at the nursery school. I volunteered to tell stories at her party. Since Kristen's mom was going to have a baby, I made a new story about how her mom and dad had made a mistake, went to the zoo instead of the hospital, and brought home a baby alligator. Kristen liked the story so much that she wrote it all down and drew some pictures to make her own little book. Years later, when I wanted to make the story into a book, I tracked her down and asked if she still wanted to be the kid in the book. Kristen said that she would be. Delighted. Kristen likes my book, but she still thinks that her own illustrated version is better. The end.